The screen fades from black. Single whisper slides through the darkness. They tried to erase this story, not because it was unimportant, but because it was too important. The year was 1876. Kentucky was celebrating America's 100th birthday with fireworks, parades, and proclamations of freedom. But on a tobacco plantation near Bourbon County 41, men, women, and children vanished into nothingness. No bodies, a ransom, no tracks leading north or south, just silence. For 3 days, the sheriff pretended to search. For 3 days. Neighbors muttered about deserters, runaways, troublemakers. Then, just as quickly as the voices rose, they fell silent. An order was given, the investigation was closed. The official record stamped the words contract breach. The case was buried, but the earth never forgets. A century and a half later, in the rotting bones of Beaumont Manor, letters surfaced hidden in the walls, concealed by hands that knew death was coming. They spoke of secret brotherhoods, wealthy landowners who gathered by torchlight, whispering of natural order and social experiments gone too far. They named names. They named places. They exposed the seed of an agenda that still echoes through the institutions around you today. Understand this. The missing workers were not an accident. They were not deserters. They were taken. And what took them was not just men in masks or jealous neighbors. It was something deeper, older, an infection inside power itself. And here is where your descent begins. Before we peel back the rotten skin of history, before we tear through the official lies you were taught, do one thing right now. Hit the like button, subscribe, and comment below where in the world you're listening from, because what you're about to hear is dangerous knowledge. It's knowledge that shifts something inside a man the moment it enters his ears. The Beaumont Legacy isn't just a story of 41 missing souls. It is the blueprint of how power hides its crimes. It's how institutions rewrite memory. How the men who claim to rule you bend reality itself. Tonight, I'm not just telling you what happened in 1876. I'm showing you the machinery of control, the same machinery that still moves under your feet. The descent starts now. Do you know what makes this story more than just a local legend? It's the silence. It's the kind that feels rehearsed. The kind that doesn't come from ignorance, but from obedience. When Sheriff Danvers tried to follow the tracks, he found them deliberately obscured. Riders had swept the road clean. Tools left in the fields had not rusted from neglect. They had been arranged. Crops were not ruined by nature. They were cut and burned by human hands. This was theater, a ritual of erasure. And then, with the arrival of Magistrate Hartwell, the silence became official. Papers were stamped, files locked, records rewritten. Not because the truth was unknown, but because it was unacceptable. You see, the Beaumont disappearance was never about 41 workers. It was about control, about sending a message. It weren't nameless hands in the soil. They were living proof that the old order, the one built on blood and chains, could be replaced with something different. A workforce integrated. Black, white, immigrant, freedmen. Families who had tasted possibility. People who were no longer broken by fear that terrified the brotherhood. And so, those 41 had to vanish. Their absence became the lesson: do not cross the invisible line. Do not build communities that challenge hierarchy. Do not test the boundaries of the machine. But here's what most miss. What happened in Kentucky in 1876 was not an isolated crime. It was a pattern repeated in different names, different counties, different institutions. Each time, the story was the same. Threats whispered, progress erased, silence imposed. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. The same brotherhood men. In power, hidden behind respectability, were engineering outcomes. This is how history is shaped. It's not by the victories you celebrate on the 4th of July, but by the disappearances you were never told about. Not by who lived, but by who was erased. Think about it. How many stories have you never heard? Many disappearances were never written down. How many silences were signed into law? And what happens when silence becomes stronger than memory? That is the true legacy of Beaumont. It's not just 41 missing workers, but the reminder that silence itself is a weapon still used today. And here is where the rabbit hole turns sharper. Those who silence history are the same ones shaping your present. They call themselves the Kentucky Brotherhood, not a name whispered in public, not something etched into courthouse walls, but a private oath carried in the shadows. Wealthy men, powerful men, landowners, politicians, judges, merchants whose storefronts lined the squares of Bourbon County. They shook your hand in daylight, then cloaked themselves in secrecy at night. The Brotherhood wasn't a gang of hooded riders burning crosses on hillsides. No, they were worse. They were the ones who ordered the riders where to go. They didn't get their hands bloody, pulled strings, signed papers, erased records. They were the machine behind the masks. One letter pulled from Beaumont Manor decades later told Jeremiah the truth in words so cold it still freezes the air when read aloud. You will cease your experiment, or you will face consequences that will echo as a warning. That wasn't just a threat, it was a sentence. And when 41 workers disappeared, the Brotherhood's warning became legend. But here's the part most men cannot stomach. This Brotherhood was not just about race or money or crops. It was about order. The belief that society itself must be engineered like tobacco rose in perfect lines. They saw integration, cooperation, self-determination as weeds in the field. Weeds must be cut, burned, erased, and so they built a ritual, not just here, not just once. The Brotherhood ensured that every man, woman, or child who threatened the order would either bend, break, or vanish. Now think about this. The very magistrate who shut the investigation down in Mend. Hartwell was not an outsider to the Brotherhood. He was its center. And in the years after the Beaumont disappearance, his wealth doubled, his lands expanded, his name carved deeper into the county's future. Is that coincidence? Or is it the fingerprint of a system that rewards silence and punishes truth? Because what you're hearing right now is not just about 1876, it's about today. About the boardrooms where decisions are made, about the committees where laws are written, about the systems that control you without your consent. The Brotherhood is not just history, it is a pattern, a program. Once you see it, you can never unsee it. Now ask yourself, if they could erase 41 people in one night, and write history so completely that even the sheriff had to obey, what else have they erased from your memory? Control doesn't begin with chains, it begins with memory. The men of the Brotherhood understood something most people never will. If you can erase what happened yesterday, you don't have to control tomorrow. You only need to keep men blind to the fact that anything was ever stolen from them. Look at Beaumont. 41 people vanish, families torn apart, crops destroyed, a community shattered. And yet how many people outside Bourbon County ever heard the story? How many textbooks record it? How many classrooms discuss it? None. The silence became permanent. This is psychological warfare at its purest. Not the crack of a whip, not the flash of a gun, but the weight of not knowing. Imagine the power of that, to make an entire population doubt what they saw. What? They whispered what they suspected. To convince them that maybe nothing happened at all. It is the same method that governments use when documents are classified, when scandals vanish into sealed investigations, when disasters are labeled accidents, and then forgotten. It is the same technique used by corporations when crimes are buried in settlements, when victims are silenced with money and non-disclosure agreements. And it is the same weapon that institutions of every kind use against you today, whether you see it or not. At Beaumont, the Brotherhood built the template, silence the event, rewrite the record, reward the silence, punish the truth. This is how men are trained to obey without ever realizing they've been broken. Because obedience isn't when a man follows orders at gunpoint. True obedience is when he never realizes there was a choice. Now listen closely. What you are feeling right now, that unease in your stomach, that tension in your chest is the same sensation men felt in 1876, the sense that something is wrong. But the official story insists nothing is. It's that crack between reality and narrative is where the Brotherhood lived. And it is where every system of control still thrives. The 41 missing workers weren't just erased from Kentucky. They were erased from you, from your history, from your identity. And if they could erase them, what else had they carved out of your memory? What else have they taken from the very idea of who you are? Understand this. History isn't written by the victors. History is written by the silencers. The silencers are still here. There's a reason you're still here. Most men would have clicked away by now, numbing themselves with distractions, running from the weight of forbidden truths. But you stayed. And that means something. It means you are ready to cross the threshold. Understand, the Beaumont disappearance is not just history, it's initiation. Once you hear the silence for what it is, once you recognize the weapon behind the mask, you are no longer the same man. You cannot go back to blindness. You are marked. But initiation requires action, not passive listening, not idle curiosity. Action. Here is the test. In the comments below, write these words twice. I will not be erased. Do it once, and it's only performance. Do it twice, and it becomes a mark. A signal not to me, but to yourself, that you refuse the silence. That you refuse to be forgotten. You will not allow your identity to be stripped by the same machine that took those 41 lives in 1876. Men who comment, it will feel the shift. Some will mock it. Some will ignore it. But those who do it will know deep down, they have locked in a transformation, a line crossed. Now, let's return to the Brotherhood. When Magistrate Hartwell closed the case, he wasn't just protecting his friends, he was conditioning an entire county. He was showing them that power doesn't need to shout. Power doesn't need to explain. Power only needs to decide what you are allowed to remember. Think about your own life. How many times have you felt something was wrong but no one else seemed to see it? How many times did you swallow the doubt, tell yourself you were imagining things because the official story insisted everything was fine? That feeling, that fracture between your truth and their narrative is exactly what the Brotherhood mastered. This is why their ritual worked, not because they erased 41 workers, but because they trained everyone else to erase themselves, to silence their own questions, to bury their own suspicions, to amputate their own memory. Here's the darkest part. Most men still live this way, silencing themselves before anyone else has to, numbing their instincts, erasing their own. Fire. But not you. Not anymore. You've seen too much. Now you begin to see it, the machine behind the mask. The Brotherhood was never just a handful of landowners meeting in candlelit rooms. They were architects of a system. Their power didn't come from guns or threats. It came from institutions, courthouses, churches, newspapers, schools, each one a piece of machinery designed not to reveal truth, but to bury it. Look at what happened after Beaumont. The sheriff obeyed. The magistrate sealed the files. The newspapers printed a fiction. Runaway laborers. Even the churches preached obedience to authority. Every pillar of society bent itself willingly to the ritual of silence. That is how real power works. Not with violence, but with cooperation. Not with chains, but with consent. Men convinced themselves that silence was survival, that obedience was wisdom, and so the machine fed itself, one erased memory at a time. This is why the story feels dangerous to you now, because once you see the machine, you can no longer pretend you are free of it. You begin to recognize the same design in your own world. Look closely. When scandals vanish overnight, that is the machine. When victims are discredited instead of heard, that is the machine. When history is taught in fragments, stripped of its blood and fire, that is the machine. And when men are rewarded not for truth but for silence, that is the machine tightening its grip around your throat. Beaumont was not an accident. It was a demonstration, a prototype of psychological control. And it worked so well that the same architecture spread county to county, state to state, generation to generation. The lesson? You don't need to kill a man to erase him. You only need to control how he is remembered. You only need to own the ink, the pulpit, the gavel, the story. And so the Brotherhood survived not because they remained in smoky rooms, but because their mindset infected the very institutions you trust. They didn't just disappear 41 workers. They rewired society to make you disappear quietly. Invisibly, every time you doubt yourself, every time you bow to a narrative you don't believe, every time you erase your own voice before anyone else does. Now you begin to understand the Beaumont legacy was never about the missing. It was about the survivors. It's about those who learned to live under silence and pass it down like inheritance. And the question is, are you still living under it too? Do not make the mistake of thinking the Brotherhood was original. Men like Hartwell, men like those judges and merchants in Bourbon County, were not inventors of control. They were inheritors. They drew from an older well. Every empire has known this truth. Silence is stronger than violence, yet the Romans erased whole tribes not by slaughter alone, but by rewriting their history until no one remembered their names. The medieval inquisitors did the same, branding heretics not because they feared their voices, but because they feared their voices would spread. And long before them, the pharaohs of Egypt carved out the names of rival kings, chiseling their memory from the stone so thoroughly that centuries would pass before anyone even realized they had lived. The Brotherhood in Kentucky was simply following the blueprint. They cloaked their rituals in Southern pride, in talk of order and tradition. But what they practiced was as ancient as power itself. Erase the inconvenient, elevate the obedient. Teach the survivors to worship silence as survival. The night of July 23, 1876 was not random. It was timed, calculated, a demonstration of authority. 41 souls vanished, not because they posed a military threat, but because they posed a symbolic one. It was an integrated workforce. Families living with a new sense of dignity. Children learning to read this was the true enemy. An idea and ideas cannot be whipped or chained. They must be smothered. But here's where it grows darker. Letters hidden in Beaumont Manor spoke of gatherings, men in suits, not hoods meeting in basements, calling themselves patriots. They drank, they pledged, they voted on punishments, and their language, though written in ink, dripped with the same venom that fueled inquisitions, pogroms, and purges throughout human history. They believed they were guardians of order. What they were guarding was corruption itself. Understand, the Brotherhood did not die in Kentucky, did not vanish with Hartwell's plantation expansions or Jeremiah's crumbling estate. Evolved like a serpent shedding skin, each generation finding new robes, new titles, new institutions. Always the same creed: protect the order, erase the threat. And so when you look back at Beaumont, you are not staring at a single night in 1876. You are staring into the mirror of civilization itself. A mirror that shows you how power survives, how it feeds, how it justifies. The disappearance was not the story. The Brotherhood was not the root. The root is older. The root is buried deep in the soil of history, feeding every empire, every institution, every system that tells you what to believe. And once you see the root, you realize it has been feeding on you too. You've seen the pattern in Kentucky. You've seen its roots in empires. Now let me show you where it hides today. The Brotherhood no longer wears Southern suits or rights. Threats on parchment, they don't need to. Their descendants sit in boardrooms, on university committees, and government offices. Their tools are no longer whips or torches. They're headlines, algorithms, and policy. But the function has never changed. Silence the inconvenient, reward obedience. Punish truth. Look around you. When a scandal emerges that threatens the powerful, what happens? Headlines blaze for a day, then vanish. Witnesses retract. Files are sealed, and the public is told it was nothing more than rumor. Beaumont, all over again. When men speak the wrong truths, whether about corruption, about war, about systems, of control, what happens? Their reputations are destroyed, careers ruined. Sometimes they vanish quietly into exile, poverty, or despair. The erasure is clean, bloodless. But it is the same erasure that struck those 41 in 1876. And the most terrifying weapon of all. Not censorship, not exile. It is distraction. Feed men endless noise, endless novelty, endless entertainment, until they no longer care what was erased. Until the silence feels natural, till they forget they ever had questions at all. The machine doesn't care if you know the truth in private. It only cares that you never act on it. That you never speak it loud enough to echo. That you never plant seeds that might grow. This is the psychological cage perfected across centuries. Understand this. When you hear about Beaumont, when you hear about the 41, you are not hearing about the past. You are seeing the mechanism that still runs your present. That mechanism decides what appears in your feeds, what your children are taught in school, what histories are remembered, and which are erased. And here is the most brutal truth. Most. Men choose to obey the silence. They trade their voice for comfort. They nod along with the narrative, even when their gut twists. They silence themselves before the machine ever has to. That is why the system still thrives. But you are here. You are still listening. That means you feel it, that pull between truth and silence, between obedience and awakening. Same machine. That erased Beaumont is around you right now. The only question left is whether you keep feeding it or finally step outside of it. Beneath the rotting beams of Beaumont Manor, in a drawer sealed shut for nearly a century, scraps of Jeremiah's handwriting were found, torn pages, ink faded, but words sharp enough to bleed through time. He did not write like a landowner. He wrote like a man unraveling. They say, "It is order we protect, but I see no order in silence. I see only decay." 41 gone, and I am told to call it mercy. And I hear their names in my sleep, louder than sermons, louder than laws. Another page, edges burned. They told me it was necessary. That silence feeds the soil. But I look into the faces of my own children, and I know if silence is survival, then survival is damnation. And the last, nearly illegible, written as though his hand shook, "If these words remain, let them remind the reader. Memory is the only weapon the weak possess. Take it, guard it, sharpen it. For when memory dies, men die twice." Do you hear it? The fracture. Jeremiah was not just complicit, he was haunted. He knew he was part of the machine, but he also felt the weight of the silence pressing against his skull, bending him toward madness. He could not speak in public, but in ink, he confessed. And then, nothing. The letters end. His trail vanishes. Some say he died on the plantation. Some say he fled west. Others whispered that the Brotherhood silenced him, to his name buried. With the same precision as the 41. The truth is, it doesn't matter what became of Jeremiah Beaumont. What matters is that his words survived. They reached you. Across time, across silence, and now his warning is yours. Memory is the only weapon the weak possess. This is why the Brotherhood feared memory. This is why they erased. Because one man remembering can become 10. 10 can become hundreds. And once memory spreads, silence collapses. That is why you are here. Not for Jeremiah, not for the 41, but for yourself. To remember what you were never meant to, and to decide what you will do with that memory. Enough history, enough ghosts. This is where you face yourself. You've followed me through Beaumont's silence, through Jeremiah's broken words, through the machinery that devours memory and feeds on obedience. But if all you do is listen, then you are no different from the men who swallowed the lie in 1876. The question is not what happened to them. The question is what happens to you. You still belong to the machine? You still numb yourself with noise? Obey every narrative? Bury your instincts? Erase your doubts before anyone else has to? Or are you ready to break? Listen carefully. Obedience feels safe. Silence feels comfortable. That is why most men choose it. They stay in their cages because the bars are padded. The floor is soft. They call it stability. They call it wisdom. But it is nothing more than decay disguised as peace. Awakening is the opposite. It is violent. It rips apart your comfort, shatters your illusions, sets fire to the story you were told to believe. Awakening costs you friends, respect, maybe even your place in the world. But it gives you back the one thing the machine cannot survive: your voice. This is why Jeremiah's words still matter. Memory is the only weapon the weak possess. He could not save the 41. He could not even save himself. But he left a weapon behind. And tonight that weapon is in your hands. So now the choice is yours. Stay obedient. Keep scrolling. Keep consuming. Keep nodding along. Remain a survivor of silence. Or pick up the weapon. Refuse to be erased. Carve memory into the present with your own words, your own defiance, your own refusal to bow. The machine will not stop. The Brotherhood's heirs still move in the dark, but neither will you if you choose to awaken. Do not misunderstand me. This is not entertainment. This is initiation. It's the only question left is, do you obey or do you awaken?